What follows is a 27-minute excerpt of a 1-hour documentary I produced in 2000 called We Were There, 7 Survivors of the Holocaust. This 27-minute excerpt is part of a 3-hour collection of excerpts from my documentaries on this and other subjects called 5 Frightfully Fine Videos, which is available here at the Arts Council or by contacting me via www.jimterr.com. We are seeking funding to distribute these videos to approximately 15,000 schools and libraries throughout the U.S.
Das ist keine Großmacht.
In the 1930s and 1940s, German Chancellor Adolf Hitler and his Nazi Party conducted a reign of terror throughout Europe, igniting World War II, which resulted in the loss of perhaps 30 million lives worldwide. Many Europeans under Nazi rule turned a blind eye and in many cases lent a helping hand, while Hitler's executioners murdered an estimated 12 million men, women, and children, including 6 million Jews, in a catastrophe now called the Holocaust. Although such genocides have happened throughout history, this one was made more chilling by the fact that it was methodically carried out in a modern, supposedly civilized society. Sadly, some admirers of Hitler, who share his philosophy and his hatred, conduct a sophisticated campaign today to convince others that the Holocaust never happened. But in spite of the pain of telling their story again, many witnesses to the Holocaust, including some who actually survived the concentration camps, are willing to talk about what happened, to help ensure that such a nightmare will never happen again, anywhere. In a downtown plaza in Albuquerque, New Mexico, hundreds of people of all faiths gather to dedicate a memorial to the millions who died in the Holocaust. In a quiet garden across town, a smaller monument also honors the memory of those who were killed. Several of the city's residents spoke to us about the events of 1933 to 1945.
This is my son Charles. He got killed in Vietnam. He was the only child we had. This is my husband and I. He was in World War II. When Hitler came to power, I was 7 years old. I was aware of it right away. My mother was Jewish, my father was Catholic. My father lost his business because of my mother being Jewish. I think we had to leave in the middle of the night. And it was hard. I was 16 when they arrested me, but in the meantime, they arrested my mother, all her family. In 1942, all my mother's family was on a train, the death train they called it. When they got to their destination, wherever it was, like it wasn't right in Auschwitz, it was somewhere else. We never found out. They were all dead. They gassed the whole train. Then they arrested my mother on Christmas Eve, 1942. walked her all through town. They marched her, the Gestapo marched her all through Frankfurt and beat her every inch of the way. She was in Auschwitz 3 days when they killed her. This is the wedding ring belonged to my mother. They sent it back after they killed my mother in Auschwitz, sent it back to my father. They arrested me the 14th of April, 1943. I was in prison in Frankfurt until December 1943. And when the Gestapo arrested me, the commissar said, a blonde, blue-eyed Jew. And I said, yes, and I'm proud of it. And at one time there were like 95 women in one large room, sleeping on straw sacks. And every Monday they would ship them off to Auschwitz, and every Monday I was ready to go. And I didn't. They saved me because of my father being Catholic. And my dad didn't know where I was. And I walked past him down the steps, and he didn't even know me. That's how I weighed 65 pounds. When I was in prison, we had a police lady that helped some older women. She helped them, and they took her to Auschwitz and killed her. So they didn't care who they killed. And no German was allowed to help a Jew, and if they did, that was the end of it. My brother and I wore the Star of David from 1942 in September, and I wore it till the war was over, 1945. You had to wear it on your left side above your heart. It was shaped like a star. It was yellow and had black Jew in the middle. And you were not allowed outside your house without it. My brother always wanted to go to Israel because he never made it. He never came home. He got killed in Bergen-Belsen. People got sick and died and starved to death. That's all there was. And he was only 18 years old, so it's hard. When I went to Bergen-Belsen last year, all I found was my brother's name in a book and 4 mass graves. And I could not go to Auschwitz to see where my mother was killed. I couldn't go because she wasn't, when my father found out, when she got to Auschwitz, the next day or two, they gave her a bar of soap and told her to take a shower. And instead of water, the gas came out, and in that shower room, the trap door opened, and down in the ovens they all went. So that I couldn't go to. I defy anybody to look at me and tell me it didn't happen. It did happen, and they knew it happened. It can happen here, it can happen anywhere, and it has happened here. No town or city is immune to it. Those maniacs are everywhere, and it's up to all the kids that are growing up now to see that it doesn't happen again. I tell you, here I am, almost 73 years old. If one ever crossed my path with the wrong look or word, I don't know what I would do. I'd probably spend the rest of my life in prison, but I would feel good enough that I've done away with one. You can't kill 6 million people and think it never happened. I mean, that's almost as big as New York City.
What did we see? We had a few minutes to spare, and we wandered into the camp a little bit. And right around the corner was the end of the railroad line. And there was a couple of open boxcars with bodies half in, half out, some on the ground. People who, for some reason, don't know. They say, oh, it never happened. Well, you tell that to these 300,000 Army men who went through these camps from one camp to another across Germany and on into the Russian area. And they'll tell you that it happened.
The Holocaust was a catastrophe. It was an absolute, total catastrophe. And sometimes we're asking people to relive, to rethink, to talk about again the most horrific moments of their lives. And it's not just that we can understand they wouldn't want to talk about that, but many of them also have lived active, full, joyful lives since then. And sometimes the survivors I know, and I know a fair number of them, want to be known as something more than just survivors.
How can we comprehend a figure of 6 million men, women, and children murdered by execution, starvation, disease, torture, and by being worked to death in slave labor? To help visualize so much humanity, here's a crowd of an estimated 17,000 men, women, and children enjoying a basketball game. Each square represents one such group of 17,000 people as we expand outward to total approximately 6 million.
You have to understand that to do something like this meant, if you were lucky, you would be arrested and deported to a slave labor camp. But normally it meant that you and your family would be shot. I saw many people put up against the wall and shot for this very thing, for hiding and transporting Jews or other people. So my father took the risked his own life, my mother's life, and the lives of all 7 children in our family. My question to you this afternoon is, how many of us would risk his life, her life, and the lives of all the people in your family for the sake of another person whom you don't know, have never seen, and will never see again? Why is it your father did this? Because many of your friends were Jewish, or because you feel close to the Jewish people? And the answer is really neither. Because these were human beings who were about to be killed. And my dad reacted as a human being to the plight of another human being.
Larry Ray left Germany for the United States in 1935 at age 18. In 1945, as a young soldier in the United States Army, he found himself at the crossroads of history. Hitler and his mistress had committed suicide, but other major Nazi war criminals were being tried in Nuremberg, Germany, and Larry Ray was there.
I was sitting right behind that little table when this witness said the final solution was applied to more than 5 million Jews.
In the course of the trial, he became acquainted with Hitler's personal photographer, Heinrich Hoffmann, who gave Mr. Ray the photographs you see here.
Well, Hoffmann worked directly under me while I was there doing the Nuremberg trials. And we became, I wouldn't say intimate friends, but we became pretty friendly with each other. He gave me the pictures. I don't know whether, I guess he took a personal liking to me.
I was born in Poland. The Jews of Poland were treated as second-hand citizens. In other words, we had our limitations. But just the same, we were not faced with a life-threatening situation. In the beginning of 1941, some Jewish refugees from Germany ended up in our area, and from them we learned these unbelievable stories of atrocities that they were exposed to in Germany. And that's when we realized that the stories we heard that we thought perhaps they were exaggerated were not exaggerated at all. This particular couple could not face the Nazis anymore, and they committed suicide. Well, knowing what to expect from the Germans, the question is, what could the Jews of Poland do? So we, my family, and I started to run toward the border on foot, the Russian border. Once we were there, we were told that since we are not citizens of Russia, we will not be allowed to cross into Russia. When we returned to our village, we found that our homes were burned out. About a week later, we were told that all the Jews have to report to a ghetto. We were told that we couldn't take with us except whatever one could carry on his shoulders. No furniture, not even a bicycle. And a family of 2 or 4 or 6 or 10 people was stuffed into a room. And if a house had 4 or 5 rooms, 30 or 40 people sometimes ended up in the same house. I think the worst thing to get used to was the uncertainty of what the next day will bring. Prior to the closing of the ghetto, and of course every Jew had to wear this yellow Star of David on his outer clothing, which was about 5 inches in diameter. Anyone found not wearing the Star of David outside would be simply taken to the woods or shot or hanged, whatever. And unfortunately, that's what happened to my father and my cousin. Now, there is no good way, or good time, I should say, of losing a father, but seems to me this was the worst time for us. And we still had to go on. After the 2 weeks, the children and the elderly disappeared from the ghetto. And of course at that time we just couldn't comprehend that they would be taken away and killed, but that's what it turned out to be, the German plan. This was already in the end of 1941, to get rid of as many Jews as they could, starting with the babies and the elderly, which they considered, of course, non-productive element. Why feed them? Then my brother and I were called on to report to a labor camp. We were sure that we may end up in Ponary, which was about 15 kilometers from the city of Vilna, and it was a killing place. That's where the Germans would take all the Jews from the neighboring smaller ghettos and promising them to take them to the ghetto of Vilna, but they never reached the ghetto. They reached Ponary. They were forced to run toward the mass-prepared graves and get undressed, and they would be machine gun. Several of the youngsters that were ordered to bring the corpses to the graves, one can only imagine what went on under these circumstances. People, when they were exposed to shooting, began to scream, run, and hoping to escape. But of course they were hit and they fell on the ground 50, 100 feet away from the graves. So the youngsters were supposed to drag their corpses and put them in the graves. Now, After the killing, the Germans were simply sitting back, relaxing, and boozing. Evidently, even for them, it was not an easy job to do. Now the youngsters realized that they will probably be shot because the Germans didn't want to have any witnesses, and they figured they'll take a chance and try to escape. Since it was a wooded area, many of them during the escape were shot and killed. Half a dozen managed to escape. They reached the ghetto of Vilna, and they told us what was going on in Ponary. Needless to say, we knew by then already that every Jew was sentenced to die. It was just a question of when, how, and where. We walked at night for another 3 or 4 hours to a place which was called Stutthof. Stutthof is a concentration camp. It had a chimney, a gas chamber and crematorium. When I arrived in Stutthof, I have a tattoo on my arm, which is 79,970. That's how many inmates were in Stutthof at that time. One can imagine a slave market where we were lined up in columns of 100, our shirts off, and the Germans would pass by and pick the ones that still had any meat on their body that looked like a better working specimen. The ones left behind had to contend with the fact that the smell of the crematorium of burned human flesh and the smoke from the crematorium chimney was just a reminder that our days are limited. And so we envied the people that were picked to be taken out of Stutthof. However, after a few months, the same people would return to Stutthof in very debilitated condition, like ghosts in slow motion. They would be taken to the gas chamber in order to get rid of a large group of people. We knew that the Germans were retreating, and we knew that the war will come to an end eventually. The question was whether we will be around to face liberation. It was a very hopeless situation because I could see people around me that I talked to 2 days earlier. They were sitting on the ground dead. And then we heard the ground was rumbling, and we knew that these were not German tanks, because somehow we figured the German tanks probably wouldn't be around here. Anyway, these were the British forces that liberated us on the 28th of April 1945. Both my brother and I succumbed to dysentery and typhoid because our systems were not used to the rich canned food that was given, to us. As an unknown figure of how many survivors died after liberation because of it. The British tried to help as much as they could, obviously, but that was the case. Now, we were separated. I was taken to a temporary hospital, and so was my brother in a different place. When I was well enough to walk around and look for my brother, I just couldn't find him. And I remember walking by and looking into every person's face, trying to find my brother, but I couldn't. when I mentioned to my mother that I really didn't know what happened to my brother, we went to the same hospital in Rothenburg, Germany, and after looking over the various papers, we found that he passed away on May 19, 1945, and was buried in a mass grave with about 4,000 people after liberation, yes. Needless to say, it was a great shock for my mother, but at the same time, we knew that we are probably one of the few families where more than one member survived. And life had to go on. I met my wife Judy in the camp of Bergen-Belsen, and she survived with her mother also. So we arrived on June the 24th, 1949, to the United States. And I would say that we are grateful for the opportunity to go back to a normal life and put the tragedy of the Holocaust on the back burner, because it isn't something one can forget.
In Germany, they came first for the communists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Catholics, and I didn't speak up because I was a Protestant. Then they came for me, and by that time no one was left to speak up.